In this Gregtech New Horizons episode, I make complicated dust, take hours to build a freezer, mine a ton of bricks, create some industrial spaghetti, bathe in experience, spend 30 hours growing trees, solve some puzzles, clear the Twilight Forest, grow actual magic mushrooms, and make some funny dust. Hello, I'm Enzo. And to start out, I'm working on something that's going to be insanely important for HV multiblocks, and that is, of course, the power hatch. I almost forgot what the word for that actually was. Anyways, unlike the MV hatch, which was still extremely complicated because I had to make the laser engraver start printing those chips and everything like that, this one, well, it's somehow worse. I need to start by making sodium fluid. To get a liquid sodium, I actually have to throw it into a fluid heater, which I've never needed until now. On top of that, I need rock salt, not just normal salt. This is getting very confusing and expensive, I know, just bear with me for a little bit. And to finish up the process, I actually need a fluid canner. But of course, I can't actually use normal fluid cells to make the final thing I need, and I'm still nowhere close to making the actual things. I need these specialized 10K cells, which are like normal cells, require a few other products to make, but not the worst. I need to add the new sodium potassium that I got into those new cells, and I should be able to make coolant cells. These brand new coolant cells are exactly what I need to actually start making my new hatches. Well, part of it at least. Naturally, these hatches require other components. There's actually a brand new type of power chip that I have to make, naturally, and a brand new type of coil that I have to make. These are both going to be pretty annoying, I have to say. The chips aren't that bad because I already have everything, and of course, I've got a clean room all set up, so I can easily make all sorts of new chips and stuff like that in there. The coils are going to be a bit more interesting. To make the brand new chips, I actually need a yellow garnet lens, which by some miracle I actually happen to have an exquisite yellow garnet. Of course, that is the advantage of spending so much time mining everything, especially with a good fortune pickaxe. And I'm gonna make a ton of circuits so that I don't need these chips for the future. Well, I'll probably still run out at some point. I'm gonna need to make like a ton of HV hatches for everything, but yeah. The last material I need is energetic alloy. This is from Ender.io. I'm guessing most of you have heard of it, but of course it requires a ton of different parts to make. I require conductive iron, which requires redstone alloy. Yeah, you guys remember that stuff from LV? The lossless cable stuff? Yeah, I need that. Then I need silver and iron, and of course, black steel and gold powder. I mean, this isn't the worst, all things considered. I have all this stuff. I'm just saying that is an insane recipe. I mean, just look at the freaking chemical composition of this stuff. And this isn't the longest one either. There's like vibrant alloy later on and fluxed electrum. As a matter of fact, fluxed electrum is so long of a chemical composition that it literally says it's too long. It's hilarious. But as you can probably guess, I gotta throw those into the electric blast furnace, throw them into the wire mill, and finally into an assembler with magnetic steel, of course. And this is how I'm gonna get my coils. One thing I will admit, I've gotten sidetracked a ton in this episode, so just be ready for that. Long story short, I spent a ton of time making just a ridiculous amount of circuits, and even that's not even close to what I need, and I'm making those so that I can work on this setup. I want to have a proper ore automation setup from crushing it to processing it, and this is going to be the thermal centrifuge side. The thermal centrifuge is another path. You can either go like just crushing it with the macerator or centrifuging it with the thermal centrifuge, and this can give you some other item drops depending on the recipe. Which, that's the funniest thing. You have to look carefully at all of the like ore drops and everything, because sometimes just the macerator will be a better option than the thermal centrifuge. I think it's like electrotine or where that blue dust looking stuff is. I actually prefer the macerator line because I think that gives 2 electrum drops, while the thermal centrifuge gives diamond dust. which, yeah, I have like 1,000 of that. It's completely useless for me right now. I legitimately just want Electrum from that line. But in this case, I'm actually going for Tantalite. I can't remember offhand what Tantalite drops, but it might be more Tantalum that I need to make more circuits. So yeah, that's one of the things I was working on here. It's kind of funny watching this all back because I did all of this stuff so long ago, I can't actually remember like when I did it. Anyways, as you can see, I'm in the testing world, and this is when I was actually looking at how some of the new buildings I'm about to get actually work. In this case, I mean, it's the distillation tower. I've been looking at this thing for a while, and it is insanely powerful. Like, I cannot stress how important this thing is going to be. I'm gonna have to make multiple of them, obviously, but it's gonna be super helpful for, like, everything. Essentially, I can get more products out of stuff like wood tar that I currently turn into benzene. You'll see soon enough, it's pretty overpowered. Of course, I made the HV energy hatches so that I can start making all sorts of really powerful new multi-blocks. One of them is something I've needed for a very long time now, the vacuum freezer. This is going to allow me to actually cool ingots, well, first of all, infinitely faster than the slow, crappy little chemical bath. More importantly, new types of ingots that I couldn't use before, which is very exciting. I'm not going to even say how long it took me to figure out how to make this thing properly. Pretty much, I accidentally put the controller block on the bottom when it's supposed to be in the middle. So that was a massive fail on my part. But now I've realized my mistakes, I have built it, and it's working, which is very exciting. Well, of course, I gotta hook up the power and everything first, but you get the point. It's pretty much done. And the first example I can use is tantalum. I've been smelting up a ton of this stuff because it's used in all sorts of diodes and stuff like that for circuits, and wow. I mean, I wrote it there, but it takes 1/8 of the time that the chemical bath does. That is insane. On top of the fact I've already stated, I can process a few new ingots, which is going to be very important later on. On top of that, I finally decided to upgrade my clean room a bit further. I replaced the thing with an HV hull and wire so that I can actually use HV machines in there easily, unlike the end of last episode where I was using batteries. Yeah, that was a pretty stupid system. But I planned it out better this time, I promise. Using 4 turbines, just in case I need all of that power. I need 3, but it's better to be safe. I can finally power the cutting machine, laser engraver, and the circuit assembler, which is all super exciting. And yes, this is the second advanced circuit assembler. It requires the EV circuits, which I'm able to produce already, which is pretty awesome. As a matter of fact, I can actually make IV circuits, which is the tier after EV. That's just insane to me, and I said it a bit later on, but for a while I was thinking, man, what's the point of HV then if I can just make the next tier circuits? Well, I'm pretty stupid because it doesn't work like that. Yeah, you're supposed to get all the materials for the next tier, duh. All moon materials, like titanium and stuff like that, that's gated behind HV. I need to make my rocket and everything like that. Yeah, I don't know what I was thinking when I thought the tiers were pointless. No, they're pretty important. I have cut out a ton of footage that's just me playing around in my test world. Well, not playing around, as a matter of fact, it's a ton of mathing and attempting to build stuff. But long story short, for a while, I've had my whole benzene setup running, and I absolutely love that thing. It's awesome. It's incredibly powerful, and I thought it was going to last way longer than it did. You see, the main problem is now that I'm going into HV, I require 4 times the amount of power than MV, which is ridiculous, but that's how the tiers work in here. Anyways, as you can probably guess, I need more power, and I need a ton of it. So I'm gonna have to build a larger Pyrolos setup, which means I require more bricks to make the Pyrolos casings. And yeah, that's the entire story of this part. I'm flying across the map to one of those roguelike dungeons where I can harvest a ridiculous amount of bricks. I mean, sure, I could easily make the bricks on my own, they're stupidly cheap and I have tons of resources, but it's infinitely easier to just, mine all of them instead of waste even more power to make everything. So yeah, that's what I'm working on. I'm gonna save us all a ton of time. Well, mostly you guys. It took me a while to set this entire abomination up. Essentially, my new Pyrolos setup is going to be 4 ovens connected to each other, you know, using wall sharing. They're going to use the same wood from the tree farm, a new diesel line for power. They're all going to be powered with MV instead of HV because HV chews up way too much energy. They are all going to have their own fluid extractors, which are HV. I think I could do MV, but that would be a bit slower. I don't think that it would work as well. Overall though, this setup, it works perfectly. I'm extremely happy with it. It also automatically extracts all of the ashes and puts that into a container because I will use those later. They can make like fertilizer and some other neat stuff. However, I actually centrifuge most of my ashes to get all sorts of really good resources. The entire setup isn't completely done because you can probably see what I'm working on right there. I'm actually building a distillation tower. Not just one, but I calculated I'll need 2 for the entire throughput of this system. Now, why am I using a distillation tower for benzene? Well, the awesome thing about the distillation tower is that it allows you to get all of the products out of your resources. And in this case, wood tar, which I'm making from wood, obviously, has a ton of products you can get from it. It's actually quite ridiculous. The main one we want, obviously, is benzene, but there's also toluene, which is extremely important for making TNT later on, and it's also a great source of power. Tholine, I think, is another one. It's similar, it has some uses in making stuff, but it's also a great power source. It also creates creosote oil as a byproduct, which not super useful anymore, but I will find a use for it eventually, and some sort of like other benzene type product, but you can't use it in power. It's actually quite worthless, I have to admit. However, I found an awesome use for this stuff later on, and I actually threw it into a centrifuge, or electrolyzer, one of the two, to get hydrogen from it. So that's how I make my hydrogen. Overall, this setup is one of the best things I've ever made because it produces so many insanely useful resources. Most of it is power, of course, but like the hydrogen utility, that's very nice. The ashes and even the carbon that I can get from the product that I electrolyze, yeah, it's amazing. I love it. Also, I love this line that the game gives us. Chuck Norris stares at the circuit until it reprograms itself. That is hilarious. I was wondering why I could reprogram circuits in my hands, but apparently you need a screwdriver, and I just happen to have one of those in my toolbox. That explains it. Anyways, I'm done setting up the final 2 distillation towers, and yeah, they're pretty awesome, I have to admit. With this entire setup, well, I don't remember the math actually, but I'm certainly creating infinitely more benzene than I was before. Probably not 4 times, but maybe it is. I don't know, it's a lot of power resources and that's all that really matters here. For now, this entire setup is going to be running off of the same diesel that I've been using this entire time. However, something awesome is going to happen a bit later on. Just you wait and see. This setup is more amazing than I could ever imagine. Also, real quick, I normally don't do this, but considering the algorithm has been very cruel recently, I'd really appreciate it if you could like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. It would mean a ton to me and help me out more than you could ever imagine. Please and thank you. Another major thing that I did here is create something called Ruby Juice. This is another thing my awesome viewers have told me about in the comments. Essentially, you require sodium hydroxide, hydrochloric acid, and ruby. Not ruby dust itself, it has to be one of the other products like crushed, purified, or impure dust, stuff like that. You can actually throw it into a mixer with those other ingredients to get ruby juice, and you can actually centrifuge that to get chrome and a couple of other byproducts like iron, vanadium, and even alumina hydroxide, which you just have to throw into the blast furnace to like smelt it down into alumina. Either way, it's a pretty awesome process because you get an insane amount of chrome from this. which is pretty important, especially right now. I require ridiculous amounts of chrome because I'm in HV. I require stainless steel to make everything. Stainless steel, of course, requires a buttload of iron, chrome, and nickel, I think. I've actually forgotten. I made so much at one point that I'm pretty good for a while. But yeah, ruby juice. I wish I'd known about this stuff way earlier because it is a very powerful recipe. Besides all the other power issues I'm having, the main reason I upgraded my setup is because I have to upgrade my electric blast furnace setup. And this thing chews through power like nothing else at this point. It's actually quite insane. Upgrading the power is obviously pretty important for, well, all the reasons. Unfortunately, I didn't make enough generators because I didn't calculate it quite right, so I have to make more. But for now, half of the system should be working. The first reason I actually need to upgrade everything is because I need to make nichrome. Nichrome, well, it's literally in the composition there, nickel and chrome, get it? And since I'm guessing most of you have played this before, you need that to make the next tier of coils for the blast furnace and obviously everything else they can go in. Thankfully, this stuff is pretty cheap and easy compared to Kanthal, but as you can tell by the upgrade, it's gonna chew through power like crazy. And of course take a super long time to process all of these ingots, so I'll be doing that for quite a while. That's also the reason I made the vacuum freezer earlier on, because I can't use the chemical bath to cool like many other ingots. It's only the very basic ones, so I need the vacuum furnace to be able to handle stuff like nichrome, for example, and eventually like vibrant alloy and manoleon, whatever that Tinker's Construct alloy is. You know, I've been looking at that for a while now as hoping to use it for all of my tools, but you'll see later on. I have some pretty cool options here. Alright, I don't know why I was trying to keep this like a secret earlier on about my entire power setup. I'll just say it now. This setup is ridiculously overpowered. Long story short, the system can pretty much power itself. I feel like there is a certain limit and you might need to add some extra power to it somehow. I would need to figure that out. The math isn't perfect, but the system can like 99% power itself, which is pretty awesome. The creosote oil that it produces can easily power both of the distilleries, which is just awesome by the way, and then the phenol slash toluene, I think I was using all phenol in the end, can power all of the pyrolysis ovens and the fluid extractors, which is ridiculous by the way. That just leaves the toluene, which I will use to power some other stuff later on to use it up, and it'll have a use in the next episode. Like I said earlier, this setup is the greatest thing ever, and it powers itself. Like, I didn't think it could get any better than the amount of resources and power it gives me, but being self-sufficient, mostly, of course, I did power it with diesel for a while, but yeah, it's pretty awesome. I love it. It took me a very long time, and making a ridiculous amount of new foil, because yeah, I ran out of that. You need tons of that to make these coils. Not to mention the fact you actually need Kanthal, like molten Kanthal, to actually make these things. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. But anyways, now my entire electric blast furnace grid is set up and upgraded. This is pretty awesome because now I can make even more new things. That's always exciting. And it's way faster than before, which is nice because I need even more stainless steel. Now that I'm creating even more power, I can produce all sorts of new buildings as well. As you can see here, I've started to upgrade my old oil refinery. That entire place is absolute garbage, and I mean it made helium. Like the worst possible way to get helium, by the way. I started with a distillation tower so that I can distill my oil into several products. This entire setup is something that I just unlocked. It's one of my new favorite things as well. It is the large chemical reactor. Well, of course, it's a giant multi-block and I have a bunch of them together. The large chemical reactor is awesome because it allows you to very easily produce a lot of recipes without having to deal with freaking cells. Yes, I finally don't have to add like fluid canners every single time I want to make some sort of oil product. They're pretty awesome. So I spent a lot of time testing setups like this. Long story short, this is the first one I made. I have a second design, actually have like a whole blueprint design for it. It's pretty neat, but unfortunately that's going to be for later. The entire goal of this setup, okay, it has a bunch of uses. Stay with me for a couple of minutes here, all right? The 4 chemical reactors in the middle are used to desulfur all of the products that I get from distilling the oil. Makes plenty of sense, right? The most convenient part about all of this is that all 4 of them require hydrogen and output hydrogen sulfide. So, and this is why I love wall sharing in this mod pack so much, I have 1 hydrogen input at the bottom and 1 sulfur output in the middle top. So yeah, it works perfectly. Of course, I have to set up all the inputs and outputs for all of the other liquids, but still, that's relatively easy. On the left side, I will be combining the light and heavy fuel that I get from oil into diesel, which is important for all sorts of stuff and will be very useful for the next setup I'm going to make. The right side will be used to convert the hydrogen sulfide into sulfuric acid, which is very important because that has tons of uses later on. Important thing I should probably note now, I was pretty stupid when I built this entire setup. There's a bunch of fail-safes and other stuff I could have built into it. The first recipe I actually made was exclusive to the large chemical reactor. That's the other awesome thing about these things. There are a ton of recipes that make producing certain chemicals infinitely easier without having to do other recipes and without having to worry about cells. One of them allows you to make sulfuric acid from hydrogen sulfide by combining it with oxygen. The primary issue is that this chews through oxygen, and I don't have enough production, so later on that explains why I had no oxygen, ever. The better recipe is just to basically dilute it with water and then distill the diluted sulfuric acid. It's nowhere near as efficient, but it doesn't chew through all of your oxygen. I also have to say, this setup is gonna be pretty spaghetti pretty fast. I mean, look at it already, and I'm nowhere near done. This is just removing the sulfur from everything. I still have to actually use, like, the refinery gas and the naphtha. The distillation tower also produces another thing like naphthatic acid or whatever that stuff is. Honestly, I don't have a use for it. It's kind of just like a useless byproduct. And I've set the thing to void any fluid that it doesn't need, which is pretty important because I'm going to be producing like a ton of heavy fuel, stuff like that I won't actually be able to use. And I really hate to waste resources because you can recycle and reuse like everything in this pack, but it's inevitable. Of course, I haven't really mentioned it, but I have also been making a ton of extra circuits in the background. I added an HV conveyor, which removes or transfers 1 stack every second, which is very nice, and that makes automating circuits a tiny bit easier. I know there is some way to automate input and output. I absolutely need to get into Ender IO pipes. Those are the best for items, in most situations at least, but I'm nowhere close to actually starting that. I have more than enough of all of the resources to make everything now, which is always super nice at this point. The next massive block of large chemical reactors that I'm working on is to make PTFE, polytetrafluoride ethylene, if I remember correctly. It's the second type of plastic that I need. It has all sorts of uses, including the sheets actually making more circuit boards so that I can make circuits a bit easier and cheaper. This entire system requires a bunch of oxygen, hydrogen, chlorine, fluoride. Yeah, it combines all of these things to make, well, yeah, PTFE in the end. I've kind of forgotten how it works. It just does. Trust me, it's an abomination. And you know it's bad when even I don't remember how something I built works. With that setup done, there are 2 final things I want to make. A second distillation tower to actually distill, I believe it is steam-cracked refinery gas? That one? Which this little machine over here is for. It's actually 2 machines wall sharing, and this is the oil cracker. It makes oil cracking, well, a bit more efficient. You know, it's kind of in the name. I think it might be a tiny bit overkill, but otherwise I'd have to use like large chemical reactors. It's just a tiny bit easier. Either way, this allows me to distill that steam-cracked refinery gas. I get a ton of good products like helium, which is one of the main reasons I built it, ethylene, which will be helpful later on, and methane. I unfortunately wasted a lot of the methane, especially considering I can throw that into the PTFE setup. I'm actually making methane over there out of hydrogen and carbon, so it's pretty cheap, but you know, it could be a whole lot cheaper, not requiring power. But yeah, the helium, ethylene, methane, all awesome products. The other two and the tiny carbon are basically worthless, so I'll kind of just void the overflow. I also moved my setup from last episode, I think it was, whenever I made the entire printing press setup so I can get a ton of easy enchanted books. I made a fluid extractor and a massive tank for liquid experience. That way I don't have to just sit there clicking essence berries for an hour to get 40 levels. This system is pretty awesome, I have to say. Of course, you can probably tell it's time to redeem like all of the rewards I've just been saving up to one point so that I don't have to constantly deal with junk clogging my inventory, because my inventory is always full half the time. A lot of it was just common junk, of course. I didn't get anything crazy good, except for this sword that I got, which is pretty cool. It's got lifesteal and flame on it, which is awesome. I don't know what resources it's made out of, but the repair is cobalt, which is interesting, and a bit of sharpness. It's kind of perfect because I have been looking for a new sword or weapon for quite a while now, so I'm very happy with this find. On top of that, I kind of discovered it later, but the most unique thing about this sword is that it's actually a cutlass, which is odd because you can't actually make a cutlass in this mod pack. Like, I knew it was that type, guaranteed, but I was like, hey, why can't I make one of these? So yeah, very interesting. Now that I'm actually consuming oil again, I kind of need to start producing more oil. The main issue with that is my original vein is kind of dried up, so I have to go find a new spot. And since I'm gonna have to move the machine anyways, I had a really neat idea. Why not upgrade it? Because I can at this point. In HV, I can upgrade to the Fluid Drilling Rig 2, and the entire structure is, well, the exact same, but it requires stainless steel parts instead. It's super easy to make and it works very well. Of course, it's way faster than the old one, we all know that by now. On top of that, this drill works in a 2x2 chunk area, so it like consumes 4 chunks at once, I guess. I'm very curious about that. Like, actually, I want to know if it's gonna choose like top right or top left, bottom right, bottom left, I don't know. I just put it in an area that has a really good oil concentration, which shouldn't really matter at this point unless you need way more oil than I do. But yeah, it's gonna produce plenty for quite a while. Over, you know, several dozen, hundreds of hours maybe, it'll drain up, but then I just move it a tiny bit in this area, and that's the beauty of this thing. Oh yeah, so I forgot to mention the other part of the oil cracker. That's actually used to crack the naphtha so that I can turn it into benzene to add into my storage. I can crack it into all sorts of other products. I was actually gonna make a tower for it, but it's gonna be like an 11 tall tower, and I was never gonna use all of those products, so might as well just turn it into benzene. Of course, these things produce carbon as a byproduct, so I have trash cans below them. I may have accidentally thrown these into the trash before. Yeah, that's a little embarrassing. The main reason I had to break these is because I was changing over the recipe to light crack instead of heavy crack, so that I can get more benzene out of it. So yeah, that adds some benzene to my power grid, which is very nice. But freaking Aurora Borealis, that is awesome. Alright, for this part, I have an insane amount of stuff to explain. Like, it's not even funny at this point. So I spent about 30 hours, and yes, because I checked the day count. At first I was like, there's no way it's 30 hours, but after thinking about it, yeah, it was probably that long. And I've just been breeding crops in this little area of the map. The whole reason I'm in this specific spot is because this is a swamp, or a lush swamp, I guess, which has pretty much the highest humidity of any biome in the game. That's important because high humidity is great for growing crops. Well, specific ones at least. On top of that, I used 4 blocks of soil, 4 layers, so that I can get high nutrients, And yeah, my entire goal here is to breed crops to get super high stats. I was doing a bunch of research on this, and for the first half of the entire process, I pretty much wasted my time. You see, I started out by growing these spruce bonsais, but that's not what you're supposed to do. You're only supposed to grow reeds and stickweed first, because that's what's fastest and easiest to do. You can see that the year has changed in this clip, and the day, and it's however many days later. I forgot what the number was. It doesn't matter. But this is what I've been working towards breeding. I'm looking for a very specific number. That is, of course, 23310. That is the ideal crop, like the most efficient physically possible. If you ever go above 23 growth is, well, how fast the crop actually grows. I mean, it makes sense. Gain, the second stat, is how much you get when you harvest the crop. And resistance has something to do with like seed drop chance when you break it and, weed resistance. But the main reason you can't go above 23 for growth is because it pretty much turns into a weed at that point and starts killing all of your other plants. So you have to be pretty careful with that. There is a way where you can go past 23, but it becomes very hard to manage. But yeah, that's what I've been working on this entire time. So why am I getting these super high stat crops? It's pretty important for later on when I need to start automating like resources and higher tier crops, because stickweed can be used to breed into other types of plants and or like mutate them, so I can get saplings, crazy good seeds. By the end of this, I had a ton of good stuff like canola, a bunch of goldfish, which will also be useful, and some other random stuff like papyrus, which is paper, hemp for string, and some super special ones that I was going for, like yellow stone lilies, which will be insanely important in next episode. But the main reason I actually started all of this, and it is mostly my stupidity, but at the same time I was gonna have to do this eventually, so it kind of worked out, honestly. But long story short, my tree farm was starting to run low on wood. The critical wood that supplies my benzene setup and my entire base with power. So apparently the primary issue with that is I built it with, I think, like tiny tin pipes, which are like the slowest item pipe I can possibly make. I thought that would never be an issue, but apparently that was the major bottleneck, and that system was clogged for several hours. That's why I was running out of wood. So, until I discovered that a few hours later, I thought my main issue was wood production. Of course, I could just make another array or two of spruce trees instead of jungle. Everything says that spruce is better, and it probably is, but I think jungle is super efficient too. But yeah, it was just my own stupidity in the end. I was making these spruce trees as a replacement because these things give way more wood. I don't remember what the exact number is, but the difference between like a normal plant and maxed out plant like this is like 8 times or something like that. It is insane how much more these give. So yeah, these will come in handy, certainly at some point, but that's probably a long while away. So yeah, that is how I was gonna say wasted, but used is actually appropriate, 30 hours on farming trees, or at the very least their seeds. Of course, it's not going to be useful for a very long time, but like I already said, this is something I was going to have to do at some point if I want, well, late game resources. Back at base, and after fixing the major mistake with my wood farm, I decided to set this thing up. I should have automated a bit more and connected it to the wood farm, because these recycling machines, they require something that's not like cobblestone or stupidly easy to make. Wood works, which is funny because it's also easy to get at this point, but whatever. This allows me to make scrap and scrap boxes. Scrap boxes can actually give you a ton of super good rewards and stuff like that. It allows you to even like cheese through a couple stages if you know what you're doing. However, in my case, I'm going to use them to create UU matter. Well, specifically the precursor to it, so that I can make the actual UU matter a bit easier. Of course, this is going to round out pretty quick, and I'm just going to make it like the normal way. That takes 4 times longer. But yeah, I want to start production of this because it's super useful for all sorts of stuff and can allow me to duplicate my seeds. Unfortunately, it takes a lot of power, especially for the high tier seeds, but just for like a good tree seed, it's not that bad. The main problem is, of course, the UU matter. Since I can only make LV machines at this point, I don't have the materials to make the HV field generators yet. This stuff is insanely slow to produce. I did the math a while back, I forgot what it was. Like, I feel like 140 hours isn't right, but it's somewhere around there. It's like an insane amount of time to get 1 kiloliter of this stuff. So yeah, that's definitely a higher tier thing for sure. I've also been able to make another super cool circuit for quite a while now. I just haven't had a real use for them. These are mainframes. They're the next tier circuit, which pretty crazy that I can make them already. And yeah, they'll have a couple very rare uses for certain multi-blocks and stuff like that a bit later on, and likely a lot more in the next episode. Just wanted to note that though, because they're pretty cool. They are quite expensive and they take annealed copper, aluminum frames, which aren't the worst, and a bunch of other circuits, circuit boards, and of course IVs. Yeah, you get the point. They're expensive. I also decided to build this awesome building called the Implosion Compressor. I've been looking at this thing for a while, but I haven't actually had the resources to make it up until now. It's actually quite a small multi-block structure for what it does, but essentially, I mean, it's in the name. It's a super advanced compressor that requires explosives, which is the coolest thing ever, to compress things. This is going to be extremely important, especially next episode, since it's required to make all of the rocket parts, and it's going to get pretty crazy, I have to say. There are some things I can make with it for now, but I kind of just wanted to have it. The best part about this thing is that you don't have to give it too much power. I only gave it MV power, and it's still ridiculously fast with a ton of parallels, which is pretty awesome. Of course, the big price of this thing is going to be the TNT that's required for it. It chews through a unbelievable amount of TNT, to say the least. But, like I keep saying, that's all for next episode. I was planning to go on a mining trip for some resources. I honestly don't remember what at this point, but it's from the Nether. But pretty much I want to make vibrant alloy now. Since I upgraded my electric blast furnace, I actually have the ability to make that. Unfortunately, it is incredibly expensive and requires ender pearl dust and blaze powder, which I don't actually have that much of. Now that I think about it, I could really plant some of the cinder pearls I think I got from breeding trees. I can't remember for sure. But yeah, I need to make this stuff. Vibrant alloy requires all sorts of things, including chrome, and yeah, you get the point. It's pretty insane, but vibrant alloy is one of the best materials I actually have access to right now. You'll see me later on. I'm gonna upgrade my hammer with it. Well, I'm planning to upgrade pretty much everything with it eventually because of how stupidly powerful it is. Actually, I don't remember why I couldn't make the vibrant prospecting kit right now, but in the meantime, I'll have to make vanadium steel, which is like several times worse, but it's kind of my best bet. Unfortunately, the HV prospecting kit requires sodium persulfate, which isn't the worst to make. That's used for board etching. I've been going the iron chloride route for a while, but I will switch over to sodium eventually. And then nitric acid, which is like nitrogen, hydrogen, and oxygen. Next up, I'm starting work on, well, a path that's gonna get really interesting, especially later on. I'll explain it when I get to it. Just know for now, I'm gonna go across the Twilight Forest and start harvesting some more ores. Back at my old base, I'm gathering some of the resources here, and I need these to start, well, you can probably see here, magic. Specifically Thaumcraft, but in general, I really hate magic mods. I've never liked having to deal with them in packs, and unfortunately, a lot of stuff in Gregtech is locked behind, well, magic, but mostly Thaumcraft. So unfortunately, I am gonna have to learn all about this and how it works if I want to get decent progression in the run. That's why I was in the Twilight Forest for a while, because I needed to get all of these different types of shards. Thankfully, I happen to have a Thaumcraft in my storage. I knew I found one of those way earlier when I was adventuring, and I had a feeling I would need it, which of course you do. To get started with this mod, well, I'm guessing most people know how it works, and if you know anything about Thaumcraft, well, you know infinitely more than I do at least. Cause that's right, I have absolutely zero experience with this mod at all. I know nothing about it, I remember nothing about it. That means I'm gonna have to learn all this the hard way, but as we all know by now, I'm quite used to learning the hard way. To start off, I have to make this meter thing. I will admit, this is one of the very cool parts about this entire mod. The whole reason you get this is so that you can start scanning things. You can scan pretty much everything. It's pretty awesome. Scanning items, blocks, well, everything I guess, gives you research points depending on what elements the thing is made up of. And the research points are absolutely crucial because research has hundreds, probably thousands of things you need to go through, and that's how you unlock more power, new technology, new things you can make, stuff like that. Alright, I spent several hours going around my base in the world scanning everything. That was insane. But that means I have plenty of research. In the Thaumcraft, you also need to make these scribing tools, which requires, feather, a ton of ink sacs and stuff like that. And that's how you get the research notes. Research notes have to be thrown into the research table. This is where things get incredibly annoying. You know how I said there's hundreds of these things? I'm not kidding, you have to do this minigame every single time you have to unlock research. It's really freaking annoying. It was especially bad at first because I didn't understand how this works at all. I actually had to look up a little calculator to help me, and even that wasn't completely accurate. But since I've been doing this for countless hours, way after I finished recording, obviously, I understand how it all works now. I will admit, I wish you didn't have to do it hundreds of times because it's a fun minigame for a little bit. It just gets extremely boring after a while. Anyways, this minigame requires you to match up all of the elements with elements that they either go into or they're made up of. You can kind of see this here. And essentially you just have to connect all of the ones that spawn in at the start to each other. Yeah, it's not that bad, especially once you get the hang of it. I have found that I actually don't remember the names of any of these. I kind of have my own names for them, but the white triangle at the top left, I think that's purity. I use that with the person running in the top right because they have the same elements, and you can do tons of stuff with that from there. All of the tools and gears, those also share elements. And since I have hundreds of those from researching all of my machines, I pretty much try to convert everything into that. I make a giant line of those, and yeah, I complete the puzzle. So it's not as bad as I initially thought, which, alright, I'll take it. And the next, probably most important of this mod, well, okay, one of the most important, I guess, is these things called nodes. Now, nodes are incredibly difficult to find, but easy if you know where to look. For example, this structure that I've been to before. This is a node, and the source of your magic, essentially. Now, I kind of forgot to bring my wand with me to actually suck up the magic, but you get the point. This is how I get all of my basic elements. This form of magic is called Viz, and it is the elements in your wand and stuff like that. It's gonna get confusing. I'll do my best to explain, but even I still haven't gotten that far into it. I don't understand it that well. My entire goal right now is to fill up my wand with all sorts of different elements, all of the 6 basic ones specifically. I can't actually harvest the more advanced ones, and I honestly don't know how you're supposed to. But I need these elements so that I can start crafting stuff, which is a pretty important part. Also, these ore nodes are very much scattered around the world, and they're very prevalent in some more magic biomes and super rare in others. This area with these massive trees is actually pretty good for them. I found several, and in the top past the river was also a great area for them. So yeah, unfortunately I only had this meter for now, but way later on, once you get like the glasses of revealing or whatever it's called, it's way easier to find and see these things. I also love looking back now because I totally missed the green one right there. I probably still haven't discovered it, but yeah, I'm looking for these. These nodes can also spawn in silverwood trees like a third of the time. However, if you accidentally cut down the entire tree like I did, I only meant to mine a single block to access it, yeah, you lose the node tragically. However, getting a silverwood sapling gives me an absolutely terrible idea that I just have to try out. If these nodes can spawn in trees, well, what if I planted my own to get the node? Well, it turns out that actually works. It's kind of stupid, but I love it. I can make nodes at my base. I mean, later on I'll be able to like transport nodes to my base using various methods, but that's not in this episode. I honestly have no clue when I'll get to doing that. Getting a lot of the first page of research done is insanely important because this stuff is all about nodes and how you tap into them. One of the best ones is definitely Node Preserver, because that allows you to not completely drain the node, and completely draining it's like bad for the node or something like that, bad for the magic, I guess. So yeah, don't do it. Apparently tapping into those dark nodes at those like evil biomes and obsidian things is also bad in some way. I legitimately have no clue why or how, but sure, I decided to use them anyways. Why not? Another absolutely critical research is chest scanning. I got this a bit later on, and let me tell you, it made scanning things a billion times easier. I just went all around my base scanning everything, and I didn't do it at the beginning here, but later on I realized I can just go ahead and scan the drawer controllers. You can also just hold shift to not access the chest, by the way. I didn't know that at the time, of course. But yeah, by scanning the drawer controllers, I could scan all of the resources in there. And yeah, I have plenty of research elements available. I also learned at the very end, you can actually just combine the basic elements in the research table to create the higher tier ones. I wish I'd known that from the start, but again, have never played with this mod before. Another interesting thing to note about Thaumcraft is all of the like evil and warp and forbidden magic. So yeah, warp is something that occurs when you do too much like research into forbidden magic or do too much evil stuff, and it gives you all sorts of like scary jump scares and effects like that. At max level, it can legitimately spawn a freaking wither, which is pretty insane. So yeah, that's bad. Thankfully, there is a mode called Wuss, I mean, it makes sense, where you can truly disable warp, which yeah, I'm totally going for that because screw that, I do not want those jump scares. I was just tabbed out for a bit, I hear a freaking intense heartbeat out of nowhere, and I'm like, nope, not having any of it. Plus, I just played Stone Block 4, which was full of jump scares on its own, so yeah, I'm not interested in that anymore at all. It's just not fun. That's one of the main reasons I'm playing in Peaceful. It's just more enjoyable. Since I need some more stuff to continue, well, trying to make magic things, I can't make them all right now, but they'll be useful eventually, I have to go fight the Lich and, well, other Twilight bosses. Since I'm here, I might as well. The Lich fight is relatively easy, considering my gear is super powerful, and I know how to actually beat him. So, yeah, there's that easy fight, and I got the Lich bones that I'll need for some crafting of a wand later on. Since I've never really played the Twilight Forest before, I had to look everything up and the right like boss progression. The next one is the Minotaur in the maze, also stupidly easy. The normal ones are kind of annoying, but this sword makes quick work of everything. Plus it has lifesteal, which is very nice. And yeah, he's kind of trapped in his own little arena, so that was easy. The boss after that, of course, is the Hydra. I really thought this dude would be way tougher because, you know, the Hydra of Legend like grows 2 heads for everyone you cut off. So I really thought that was going to be the case here and be infinitely difficult, but not really. I mean, my gear, well, not really my armor. I did improve my armor a tiny bit from drops here, but this sword is just so powerful that, yeah, it's super easy. It was very nice and fun to go throughout the entire Twilight Forest, because again, I've never done this before. I remember watching it in, well, super duper old videos at this point, but I barely remember anything about it, and yeah, I've never gotten to clear it for myself. It's certainly a neat experience. I mean, it's pretty easy to tell just how old this pack is, or, well, the mod, but it's still insanely fun. There's also one thing I was thinking for this part in specific, since this part is like the giant dark forest. I have so much like video game music from games that I really like, but most of the time I use the same stuff over and over. Usually for Gregtech, it's some Borderlands 2, Borderlands the pre-sequel, and a bunch of Oxygen not included. Of course, those are some of my favorite games, so it makes sense. But for once, I decided I want to use the Jacob's Cove theme from Borderlands 1. It's one of my favorite themes, even though it's super like creepy and unsettling, because that's like the entire environment of the Jacob's Cove. It really makes you want to play Borderlands 1 again. That game has some amazing DLCs. I mean, the Jacob's Cove, which is the zombie DLC, that one's awesome. The Claptrap Robot Revolution is the best, and General Knox. Dang, now I really want to play Borderlands 1. But yeah, there wasn't anything too special in this area, except for this, which, yeah, this intersects with the snow biome, which is tragic because I haven't unlocked that area yet, which means there's a constant blizzard and I get a horrible movement speed reduction, besides the fact, you know, I can't see anything. Thankfully, the boss isn't near this place, though. That would have been horrible. I'm pretty sure my world gen was just bizarre because I couldn't find the final area until, well, the very end, I guess. That kind of makes sense. And these guys, or whatever this boss is, was an absolute joke to say the least. Of course, I haven't fought anything super difficult yet, but my gear, and I'm saying this again, the sword that I got from that loot bag, stupidly overpowered. One of the best finds ever. For the final tower, I didn't realize it until I got to the very top. I may have completed it in peaceful by accident. I mean, that's not a major issue because everything would have been easy to kill either way. The most notable thing about this fight is how you have to use the machines to like suck the ghast in and hit him with melee. Well, that's what I had to do at least. I'm pretty sure you can just use ranged weapons. The tiny issue being I kind of ran out of ammo for my bow. Yeah, I didn't think that one through. I knew this boss was a ghast, but yeah, that happened. So once I returned to base, a big priority is absolutely upgrading my crossbow and getting more ammo, and preferably something that does better damage, because it kind of sucks as well. There is 2 more bosses. This is the final boss, of course. The earlier one is like a Yeti. I mean, super easy, of course. He pretty much just like runs at you and grabs you, so a little bit annoying, but the Snow Queen was a real problem. The main reason I'm not flying half the time is because I can't. The issue with the gas fight is that it's so high up, my jetpack doesn't actually work at that height. So that was interesting to say the least. Same kind of issue with this fight. The Snow Queen prefers to hover above you, so she's really annoying to hit. But of course, if I do manage to land a hit on her, she just gets melted. And yeah, that's essentially the Twilight Forest complete, which is very nice. I'll definitely come back here for other stuff at some point, but I mostly needed all of the boss kills and everything like that for their drops so that I can do magic stuff. Alright, going back to stuff I actually like doing and care about, it's time to build another large chemical reactor, or LCR, setup. This one is going next to my current desulfurization and diesel setup because, well, I need that diesel. Currently, I actually have a super tank full of like 4 million liters, which is insane, and means I have plenty to spare. So, what am I going to use with diesel, and why this complicated setup? Alright, this setup was actually so complicated for me that I made, for the first time, what I call a blueprint, or guide. It might look a bit confusing, but let me try to explain how it works. And yes, I made this in paint. The background was originally white, but I changed it to gray so I don't flashbang everyone. I know some of the names might be a bit confusing, but just let me explain. The 4 LCRs on the right are dedicated to making different chemicals that I need for the one on the left. My entire goal here is to make something called Citane Boosted Diesel. I will probably call it CBD at some point, but don't be confused with the marijuana thing. It is Citane Boosted Diesel. It requires all sorts of complicated chemicals to actually make it. To start out, I need to make nitric acid, which is easy enough in the large chemical reactor. I require hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen. As you can see, the oxygen shares the right. As you can see, the oxygen input is in the middle because the top right also requires it to make acetone. Acetone has several recipes, of course, but I can make it easily with ethylene, which I have plenty of at this point, and oxygen, so that works. Alright, the bottom right one, I know it looks like ETH for ethanol, but it's actually ethanone? Something like that? It requires acetone and sulfuric acid. Thankfully, I produce plenty of sulfuric acid from the current diesel setup, and then I can re-import that into this thing. It produces diluted sulfuric acid as a byproduct, so I have to get rid of that. I actually just put it in a distillery to turn it back into standard sulfuric acid, and that goes back in my storage, of course. And then that ethanone is output into the bottom left. The bottom left also requires the nitric acid, and it produces trinitromethane. Yeah, I kind of labeled that poorly because it looks like TNT. And it's not the trinitrate, which is the actual TNT explosive. It's that other TNT, the methane. I actually had to write this down and double check it because I cannot pronounce that thing to save my life. So that's the only time you're gonna hear me say it. Okay, but that final chemical goes into the final LCR with, of course, diesel to make my cetane boosted diesel. This is a very complicated process, I know, but we're still like early on in the pack, which is insane to think about. Besides using up all sorts of resources that I already have, the main reason to actually do this is because the cetane boosted diesel, I think the energy has more than double, I believe, the power value of diesel. I think 1 kiloliter of diesel is 480,000 energy units. Cetane boosted diesel is 1 million. So yeah, for the price of this stuff, it's absolutely worth it. Especially considering the power for it is essentially free because it's just using tooling, which is, you know, a power byproduct at this point. So yeah, it's pretty awesome. I am still loving every minute of Gregtech because unlocking the LCR is like one of the best things ever. I'm just able to create so many new things and infinitely easier than before. It is amazing. Another tiny thing I made in like a little array there is a giant centrifuge and electrolyzer setup. This is to start dealing with some of the resources I have like stone dust and the ashes that my wood power plant produces. I can kind of spin those into other resources that might be useful later on. I can also use the electrolyzers later on to recycle stuff like hydrochloric acid back into chlorine, because I desperately need that, and way later on, carbon dioxide back into oxygen. Because believe it or not, I am running out of oxygen very fast with all these setups that I'm making. The big killer was absolutely the sulfuric acid recipe. That chewed up all my oxygen when it really wasn't worth it. I've also been doing some magic stuff in the background, but that's not really important. I wanted to finally start upgrading my gear, because even though the sword is awesome, my bow is extremely outdated. So I wanted to check something out. You can make bolts, which require 2 specific parts. There's the actual like tool rod part of the bolt, and there's the tip. You see, the original Magnum bolt that I made had an iron tip, and that's part of why it's so garbage. But after I was looking at how you can actually make the bolts, I realized there's plenty of other materials you can use as the tip. So I wanted to test out what all the different tip materials actually do, because that's pretty important to making an optimal bolt, especially at this stage. So I tried all sorts of materials, and the winner, by miles by the way, is Vandom Steel. It really shocked me because I thought for sure something more powerful like Minoleon or Vibrant Alloy would be better, but No, I guess it's actually vanadium steel, which I've had forever at this point. The accuracy isn't that great at only 87, practically 90%. Well, I think that's actually due to the leaves that I use for fletching. Still, these things hit like an absolute truck. So yeah, this is going to be an insane upgrade, on top of the energetic alloy bow that I'm making. I have to say, my new weapons are pretty awesome. I decided to take a quick trip to the Nether, and I was kind of just one-shotting everything. It was so much fun, I have to say. These upgrades were an amazing choice, especially for stuff that I'll have to do later on. So yeah, just wanted to note that. My gear is actually decent now. That's not even talking about the armor that I got from the Twilight Forest. That stuff is really good as well. And as you can see here, I've managed to grow a tree that actually spawned a node, which is pretty awesome. This grew a bit earlier. For a while now, my biggest issue with all of the Thaumcraft stuff is that I have to get viz from these nodes all around the world. It's been incredibly annoying. However, there are actually other sources of this viz that I need. One of them is these primal shrooms, which you have to craft in the cauldron. It's a specific recipe, but you get the point. Breaking these after they've grown allows me to get viz, which is pretty awesome. You can also get viz by killing mobs, which is interesting enough. I like this a whole lot more now that I don't have to run around the world for hours collecting tons of viz, which I require to store in the wand and craft all sorts of new things. I think way later on, I don't know if I showed it or not, I made this stuff. I think it's like fertile soil, but that soil allows crops to grow way faster, but only normal crops, because it like ticks them faster. Yeah, it doesn't work with IC2, sadly. I really wish it did, but that'd be overpowered. But these very basic primal shrooms, you put them on the soil and they grow stupidly fast. So yeah, I have a tiny, not automated, but basic viz farm where I don't have to leave my base. So at some point, I think I'm gonna do a whole dedicated video on like everything I hate about magic, but the primary reason is because it's so stupidly complicated and ambiguous. Of course, the mods are made that way because, it's magic. It has to be mysterious and complicated. And honestly, I have zero interest in that. That's why I hate magic so much. I think it can be cool if it just weren't so freaking complicated. You see, even though Gregtech and all of those things are infinitely more difficult to work with, at least everything makes sense. Like, machine has output, I know how to filter and use output, but yeah, this is complete garbage. And no, this setup is not legitimate. I do not care anymore. I hate magic. I had to actually look on the wiki because even after watching a couple videos, I still couldn't understand how these dumb pipes work. I actually made the tower legitimately. This can be used to extract the elements out of materials, and it's pretty important for this entire mod. The problem is I just couldn't get the elements to go into the pipes and jars. Well, guess what? This mod is funny and decides that only special pipes can transfer multiple, liquids, I guess, and the basic pipes can only do it one at a time, which I think is just the most ridiculous system ever. I hate this. So I eventually figured out how these pipes work, how to make them flow the right way, and eventually put everything into jars. Unfortunately, these jars also have a horrible capacity of 64, and I have no clue how to use the fluid from them. How do I extract it besides vials? How do I automate any of this? Yeah, needless to say, I'm not really going to be doing much magic until I get applied energistics where it becomes actually easy. So yeah, I guess we'll see. And I'll deal with more of this in the next episode because I lost interest very fast, as you can probably see. Anyways, returning to stuff that I actually like doing, I'm working on something very interesting. It's actually an upgrade to my current chests. It's a combination of diamond chest, which I need to turn into obsidian using dense obsidian plates. These things are fun. They literally cost 9 obsidian plates to make, and they take forever to craft. And that's at HV2, so yeah, they take a while. It's pretty ridiculous. On top of that, I need my steel chest and an HV electric piston. So pretty expensive. However, it's essentially the combined capacity of a diamond and steel chest. I think that's literally what it is. So yeah, 243, that's pretty insane. It's such a big inventory, as a matter of fact, that it actually like blocks out the JEI, which is pretty crazy. The most interesting thing about these is that you can't actually pick them up with dollies like the other chests. You have to mine them with a high tier axe, or high enough at least, to be able to get them in your inventory. I guess that's why it says however many out of 243. So that is nice that I don't have to carry around dollies, even though I have them in my backpack, but it sucks because I have to swap to my axe every time I want to pick one of these up. Still, it is incredibly useful when you're dealing with like massive veins of ores or different types, so that's going to be pretty awesome. I'm definitely gonna have to make a few more of these, especially once I want to go to like the moon, where I'm going to have an insane amount of stuff to bring home. This clip is after the last one. I've been doing all sorts of random stuff around the base, but I wanted to show it off because I found this next thing really crazy. Alright, so I want to upgrade my clean room. That's one of my big goals for next episode. However, to do that, I'm going to need an insane amount of black steel dust. However, I found an equally crazy recipe for it. It requires 15 stacks of steel and a bunch of other stuff, but that's way easier. I just wanted to say that because, yeah, even I don't have enough steel in reserve, at least in powder form like this, to make it just yet, so I'll have to grind some garbage down. I just found this recipe insane. So insane that obviously I had to do it. So yeah, that's how I'm gonna get my black steel for probably a little bit. One of the things I was working on is setting up this whole line. Well, I'm not going to automate it for a very long time, which I should have done like from the beginning. That's one thing I seriously need to work on, especially at this point. But I was making rare earth. One of the ore processing setups that I made earlier, I can actually use to create rare ore, well, process it at least. The first step in making rare earth, pretty much I have to process. Well, there are a couple of options, but the easiest for me is redstone because I have a ton of that in storage. And I think a couple of the steps can drop rare earth, but yeah, so you get a small chance to get the rare ore dust. That's the first step. The second step is throwing it in a chemical bath with, in this case, sulfuric acid, then you get crushed rare earth ore. From there, there's a couple of things you can do. Later on, I'll build a forge hammer. I prefer the forge hammer and centrifuge route, or you can go the thermal centrifuge route. They're kind of the same pretty much. You get some yttrium as a bonus, which is nice, but we're mostly there for the rare earth dust that I can then throw into a dehydrator to get all sorts of bizarre ores. A couple I already know, like yttrium. Some are very simple, like the cadmium sulfur one, and then there's the iron, copper, sulfur one. The other ones can only be electrolyzed, and you get all sorts of crazy stuff from them. So yeah, I'll be dealing with those in next episode. Of course, I can't really use much of this stuff for now. A lot of it is like in preparation for way later on. Anyways though, that's gonna be it for this episode. I honestly don't know how long this is gonna be. I certainly felt like it was way more, especially considering, I mean, looking at the data, I started at 400 hours, I remember that, but somehow the end is at 570? That makes zero sense to me. I know, like, most of that was AFK. I guess maybe the pause screen counts as playtime. That's the only thing I can think of why playtime is that long, because that's a bit ridiculous. I know I was playing for quite a while, but yeah. As always though, thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it, and a very special thank you to all of my channel members and supporters. Again, thank you all very much. I hope you have a good one, and this is going to be Enzo from LookIntoGaming signing out.